glad we got more to the class.
Not sure if
Get a recap.
the other two Hammond boys are coming, so we'll let it be. Those Hammonds.
Jared said he would be here.
My whole front row.
Yeah,
All right, so let's quickly, somewhat quickly, hard to do quickly. Let's now do our complete recap of Aristotle and remind ourselves of what he thought in each of our 5 major fields of philosophy. So going all the way back to the beginning of the organon and understanding his metaphysics. So in understanding his metaphysics, first off, we remind ourselves, how did Aristotle view the laws of logic? He viewed these as metaphysical laws. The same way that Newton's law of gravity is a law that governs over this universe and governs our physical universe. Here's our physical universe. Newton's laws, those laws are laws on how this universe functions. Aristotle viewed the laws of logic as metaphysical laws. Not only is every physical thing in this universe subject to these laws of logic, but everything, even your ideas, your concepts of thought, your proofs in physics, have to use the laws of logic. Everything has to use the laws of logic. It goes beyond just the physical. It's a metaphysical law. Everything is subject to it. So that's his view of the law of logic. Now, where does he drastically differ from Plato?
The world of forms.
Forms. Roughly, what was Plato's metaphysics? Out there somewhere is the world of forms. And we're somehow just projections, shadows of these forms. We're in some sense not real. That's the real stuff.
Yeah.
Forms, universals, those are what's real. These individual particular things are somehow not real. We're somehow shadows of the real stuff. Aristotle says, no. Individual particular things are primary. They come first. So we call them primary substances. And he referred to the forms of things as their secondary substance. So you might remember that box that we drew 100 times of things that are in, not in, predicated, not predicated. You remember that box? The main section of the box, the things that aren't in and aren't predicated of anything, are primary substances. And everything else is either in a primary substance or it's predicated of a primary substance. Furthermore, he says, every individual particular thing is composed of form and matter. You are matter in some particular form. And so again, Plato, it's not that the forms exist out there somewhere. The forms exist in the particular entities that are in that form. There isn't chairness out there in some other universe. Where does chairness exist? In that chair, in that chair, in that chair, in that chair. It's the forms that actual matter is in. So remember, matter is what the thing is made from. Form is what it's made into. So everything possesses form and matter. Now we also have this concept of actuality and potentiality. What is your actuality? It's the form you currently possess. That's what you actually are. You actually are a man. If I mean you, by this collection of organic matter. If I suddenly feed you to some carnivore, you're no longer, that organic matter is no longer actually a man. It's taken on a new form. And it's actually now part of a tiger or whatever. Right?
Yes.
So this is, actuality is the form your matter currently possesses. Potentiality are the forms that you could potentially take on. We already use this word exactly how Aristotle introduced it almost. We still use it in very much the same way. And so what you actually are dictates what you potentially could be. A pile of wood is actually a pile of wood. It could potentially be a chair or a table. However, that water sitting in the ocean, it's actually some liquid water. It is not potentially a chair. You cannot construct a chair out of liquid water. And so not anything can happen in our universe. And the only things that can happen in our universe, the only things that could potentially occur, depend upon what actually exists now. So there's some order and some law to the way that things could happen. And not just anything could happen. What could potentially happen is dictated by what actually exists now. Then we have his 4 causes, the 4 things you need to understand if you want to fully understand any change. Remember his 4 causes?
feel like I should.
Sorry, well,
uh,
I'll do that.
Go back to, I construct a statue here, a big marble
Oh.
statue.
yeah. Okay. So all the questions.
Yeah,
I don't think
it's everything you can know about that statue.
Who made it?
Who
How
made
it was
it?
made?
So,
we made it.
What it was made
what
of.
causes it to be made, we call that the efficient cause, the
Yeah.
thing that brought about the change. So if I'm a sculptor and I create a statue here, then I am the efficient cause, and so is my chisel, and so is my hammer. The things that went into actually causing the marble to take on the form of whatever, let's say I made a statue of Plato, I'm the efficient cause. Modern science is particularly focused on studying the efficient causes of things. What causes it to happen? The efficient cause of getting this electron to move from here to there is a charge I put over here.
Okay, that makes sense.
So there's the efficient cause,
What it's made of.
what it's made of, the material cause, the material you are using in your change. So when you engender your change, what's the material you use to get the change from? In our case of creating the marble statue of Plato, it'd be the marble block. That's the material we used. What else?
What it's made to be. Like what it like.
The form that it takes on. Its formal cause. So I started out with something that was a block of marble and not a statue of Plato. And I ended up with something that was a statue of Plato and not this rectangular prism of marble.
Okay, that makes sense.
So it's the form you change it into. The matter is the form it had in the beginning. The form that we meant here is what it has after the change.
Yeah.
And then the last cause,
Is
the
why.
final cause, is the why. What was the purpose behind that change? Remember, Aristotle is a universal. He's a, I don't know if it's a universal teleologist is technically the right word, but he's a teleologist in that he thinks that there's purpose behind every change. Every change, there's a purpose behind it. Now, he thought that the purpose existed in the thing itself. Why does an acorn become an oak? To fully actualize itself and become an oak, it has some purpose within itself. He didn't think about some externality causing the acorn to become an oak. And it's for some external beings, reasons that the acorn becomes an oak. He thought that was internal to it. The same way that you go through changes, cause things to happen for your own purposes that you have in mind. In like manner, the acorn had its own purposes in mind, and even the earth. Where does the earth want to be? At the center of the universe. And so it moves down. And the air and the water wants to be just around the earth, and the air just around the water, etc. So there's purpose in everything. Everything happens for a purpose. We had the 5 elements. We already mentioned a couple of them.
Earth, fire, water, air,
Ether.
ether.
Ether. So water, fire, earth, and air, those all move up and down. And based on their density, dictates where they end up in the universe. Earth is the densest, so it falls to the center of the universe. Water is the next densest, so it falls on top of that. Air is the next densest, so it falls on top of that. And then fire is the least dense, so it falls on top of that. And then ether is the one that moves circular. Remember that that's what the spheres containing the planets and the stars are composed of. You can think about it as almost like see-through glass, transparent glass. That's the ether. And ether doesn't want to move up and down. How does ether want to move?
Circular.
Circular motion. Why? Because that's its natural motion. Why does a rock fall? Because that's its natural motion. Right? Just an observable fact. Go watch the stars. They rotate. Why do they rotate? They rotate. Why does a rock fall? It falls.
Yep.
Starting with the observable facts. Terrible explanations, but he's trying to explain the facts rather than telling you these facts are an illusion. Your senses lie to you. The facts are the facts. That's the starting point. All right. The 5 elements. And then finally we had the prime mover. What's the prime mover?
Nous?
What?
Never mind.
It's basically like something like above ether that's
Yeah, it's outside the
outside
universe.
ether. Yeah, that basically just thinks.
Yeah, it doesn't move, but it's a source of all motion.
It's the source of movement.
That's-
Remember that motion is communicated inward from the spheres. Remember, in Aristotle's view, the Earth's at the center of the universe, right? And you got the moon goes around that, the planets, the sun goes around that, everything goes around the Earth, and the Earth's at the center. And motion is communicated inwards along the spheres. The sun causes motion on the Earth. The Earth does not cause motion on the sun. It's very strange. The sun comes up and suddenly birds start chirping. You wake up, you get out of bed, all because of the motion of that sun. What do you do that affects the sun? Nothing. So Aristotle thinks that motion is communicated inwards along the spheres, and that outer sphere, the sphere of the stars, remember there's also intelligences connected with these. They are somehow aware, somehow conscious, and that outermost sphere of the stars is somehow aware of the prime mover. And in an attempt to participate in its perfection, it moves in a perfectly spherical orbit. And so the stars moving causes all the other planets to Earth and the moon and the sun and and it creates the motion here on Earth. So if we were to look into the inefficient cause of any chain of natural events, like we see a tree fall over. Why did the tree fall over? Well, this boulder came down the hill and knocked it over. Well, why did the boulder fall down the hill? Well, this lightning struck and hit it in a weird way. Why did the lightning strike? Well, because the clouds moved this way. Why did the clouds move this way? Well, because of the heat from the sun caused the water to move up, And if you were to follow it all the way back, it would be back to because the most outer sphere was trying to participate in the perfection of the prime mover.
Yep.
And so in that sense, the prime mover is the source of all motion in our universe. Make sense?
Yep.
Remember, our universe is eternal, so there isn't some first motion. Aristotle thinks that's impossible. Since it's eternal, there's an infinite number of time, and you can't have something infinitely far in the past cause something now. Because it has to go through an infinite chain of events, which is impossible. So you need something constantly supplying motion to the universe. That's his prime mover. Okay, so that was quickly his metaphysics. Now his epistemology, far more interesting. We need to quickly draw out his map of knowledge that we kind of drew at the very start. So for Aristotle, all knowledge can be broken down into three types of knowledge. So what he would call I won't have space to write it if I spell it all the way out. We'll call it philosophical knowledge. Then we have practical knowledge. And then we have artistic knowledge. Philosophical knowledge, we are concerned with discovering what is true. This guides all our fields of study. Everything we've been talking about in this course or any classes I've ever taught you comes in this category. These are where we're trying to learn what's true and what's false, what is or is not the case. Fields of practical fields are fields concerned with good, the good. They are concerned with right and wrong action. We don't talk about whether or not the Pythagorean theorem is true or is good, and we don't talk about whether or not you buying a car is true. We say, should you buy the car? Is that a good decision or a bad decision? We say, is the Pythagorean theorem true or false? And then finally, over here, in art, we're concerned with what is or is not beautiful, beauty. So the good, the true, and the beautiful each has their own categories. Now, our first field in philosophical knowledge, what Aristotle called first philosophy, but we now call metaphysics, is metaphysics. Metaphysics. Kind of got there. That's the first thing you study. He thought after that you should study math. And then after that you should study physics, what he called physics. But with physics we include all the natural sciences afterwards. So biology is a subfield of physics. Chemistry is a subfield of physics. Thought this is the order that you should study these.
Well, you didn't even have the Newton's laws.
No, he had his own laws of motion that we talked about. For example, he didn't think F equals ma, he thought F equaled mv. He didn't state it that way, and it's before the time that you thought to encode laws in equations. That comes later, that's one of the breakthroughs with Galileo, but that's how he thought it. Go ahead.
Where does he put logic in this?
Metaphysics.
Yeah, we got to get to logic.
Okay, sorry.
Isn't metaphysics logic?
Go ahead.
No,
Metaphysics, laws of logic right there.
exactly. Metaphysics, in a sense, is everything.
Okay, logic.
So, you'll see the breakdown here.
Alright.
Okay, in practical fields, first off we had ethics. You also have politics. And he didn't really separate it out as a work, but over here he also puts economics. These are fields where you're focused on what you should or should not do. Economics here being the art of cultivating wealth, is the way that he would think about that. And then finally, over here in the beauty, unfortunately, we didn't touch upon this at all. We just didn't have time anymore. I couldn't keep doing it. But over here, we have the poetics. And poetics is a bit more general than what we think. We might think poetics is related to poetry. Poetics is focused on how to make things well-made things. And then over here, rhetoric, which is well-made speeches. And that's his map of knowledge, with their own distinct, separate fields. Now she says, where does logic come in? Or Aristotle's organon. Aristotle's organon, he thinks, is the study of fields of studies. This is what you have to use to develop any single one of these fields of study. You have to use this organon. And so, in his categories, he focuses on definition. Use definitions of words in all these different fields. Then he goes on and he talks about basically grammar. And again, if you're constructing arguments, you're going to be using grammar. And then logic. Once again, logic is going to be used in all these various fields. And then his posterior analytics is where he's now focusing on how to derive this. In his, on the topics, his topics is largely focusing on how you develop this. And then his sophistical reputations is somewhat focusing on this. And how you develop those types of fields. So that's where logic and the organon come. They're the study of everything. There isn't the field that you can use logic in and fields that you can't use logic in. Field is the one ubiquitous thing. It doesn't matter what field you're in. If you're studying mathematics, if you're studying physics, or you're trying to come up with an interpretation for a poem, it is perfectly valid to use logic. Okay, so that was his map. We went over his categories, or his definitions. Remember his categories, his initial categories? Basically, he was trying to categorize every single type of simple concept a human being can have. And so we had primary substances, we had secondary substances. Those came under substance. That was one of the categories. Another one of the categories was quantity. Another one of the categories was relations. Another one of the categories was qualities. And so he had his 10 categories. And he thought that these were your starting places of definition. So if I were to start by asking, what's the definition of a man? He would say it's a rational animal. And so you define man using animal as your genus, and he called that species. And then what's an animal? He would say it's a living thing capable of deliberate movement, or something to that effect. So it's a type of living thing. And you ask him what's a living thing, he'd say it's a substance that possesses a soul, a life. So it's a substance. You get back to substance, you say, what's a substance? He says, bad question. That's one of our starting categories. Because in defining something and stating what it is, you say it's one of these with this differentiating characteristic. And we still largely use his notion of definitions for most not too rigorous fields today. What's an exothermal chemical reaction? It's a chemical reaction, that would be its genus, that releases heat. That's its differentiating characteristic. So that's where he gets his series of definitions, and ultimately, if you follow back any of your concepts, your words, their definitions, it would go back to one of his 10 categories, 10 initial categories. All right, formal logic, we spent a lot of time on, developing the rules of deductive reasoning, how to apply deductive reasoning, using the rules of logic. You might remember things like this, M-A-N, or capital N like that, and I can't remember what that was. This was saying M can be predicated of all N, something like that.
Where did you teach this?
For formal logic.
I think I vaguely remember this.
M can be predicated of all N. N can be said of some T. Therefore, M can be said of some T, or something like that.
Is that like composed of or not?
We won't dive too much into it if you don't remember. You can go back and watch the lectures on it. So, went over developing the rules of logic and why certain phrasing of certain combinations of putting statements together imply the next statement is true, and other combinations don't. Give you a concrete example. I tell you, all men are mortal. Socrates is a man. Therefore,
Socrates is
How does that magically follow? Now I tell you all men are mortal, Socrates is a pig, therefore, and nothing can be deduced. So there's certain structures that seem to entail a truth and certain structures that don't.
Okay.
And so he went through trying to document all the structures that you could use and what they had to be like.
He did.
And he encodes everything in 4 categorical sentences and then gives you all the syllogisms that you can construct with his categorical sentences.
Yeah.
What do you call that again?
What did he call what? You had his 4 categorical sentences,
Yes.
and then the syllogisms is where you combine 2 to get some result.
Okay, syllogism.
Syllogism, yes. Okay, so that was his form of logic, developing the rules of deductive reasoning. And then, I didn't mean to put science there, I meant derivation. So then, in the fields over here, we start with what he calls first principles, and then we can apply derivations to those first principles to come to conclusions. We can start with our first principles and apply logic and reason to those first principles to come to conclusions. So you use derivations in the scientific fields. He calls these, when he uses the word science, he's referring to these fields. These are your scientific fields. These are your artistic fields. And then sometimes he talks about the art of politics versus the science of politics. And there's kind of 2 ways of viewing this one. We both talked about derivations, but there's also this second part to it that's not really derivation. That's where deliberation comes in. So he also talks about deliberation. This has to do with the fields over here. You cannot come up with some derivation as to whether or not you ought to steal that cookie. There aren't the first principles of ethical action. Or whether or not pick something that's more innocuous. You're trying to figure out what should you major in a college. That's an ethical decision. How on earth do you determine that? There aren't some given set of rules, and if you just work really hard on this problem, you come to the right guaranteed conclusion. There's no right guaranteed conclusion. And so you just have to deliberate over the options available to you to try and come to the right decision. The best decision you can come up with. So you use deliberation in ethics, politics, and economics. Should you or should you not buy that car? The answer is obvious. No. Not if it's new. And then finally, over here in the art field, you're now focused on technique, developing a skill. You don't deliberate about how to shoot that basketball. You don't do some derivation about how to shoot the basketball. You go out there and you keep shooting and keep shooting and keep shooting, and you develop that muscle memory, that technique, that skill.
Yeah.
So that's what we're focused on over here in the arts, is developing technique. Now, how do we come to know things, according to Aristotle? First off, we're exposed to sense data. I hear things, I smell things, I see things. That all comes in as sense data. That goes through what's called our central sense or our common sense, and it creates a perception. I smell something, I see something, I hear something, and my brain puts together a dog's running past me, and it's a wet dog because I can smell it. That's the perception. I perceive a wet dog running past me, but my sensory data was just all the things I saw, heard, smelled, tasted, felt, all that. So we take all our sense data, it goes through what he called our central sense, our common sense, and creates some sort of perception. With enough of these perceptions into our passive mind, we're able to form a concept. So I take a child and I say, look, a dog, look, a dog, look, a dog. Give them enough of those perceptions, those go into their passive mind. Your passive mind is a part of your mind that can take in forms. It's a part of your mind that becomes informed. And with enough perceptions, the child is able to output the concept of a dog. They get the abstraction, dog. With enough concepts, those now go into your active mind, the reasoning part of you, and you can start putting together propositions. You come with enough perceptions, you come to understand what dog is. With enough perceptions, you come to understand what cat is. With enough perceptions, you come to understand what fighting is. And you put together the proposition, dogs and cats fight. Right?
Yep.
And then, again, you can take the propositions, run through your active mind, and you can start taking a series of propositions together using logic to start constructing arguments. And so if I were to give you some argument about the Pythagorean theorem, those of you used to the way I prove things, it's a list of propositions. I say first proposition, some statement, second proposition, some statement. Do it sentence by sentence or proposition by proposition. And together the whole thing constitutes an argument. And again, it's my active mind doing that. The constructive part of me. Not the part of me taking in forms, but the part of me using the forms I take in. And again, you can take your arguments and you can build entire fields of science from it. I got enough arguments about geometry, I could build a science of geometry in the way that he uses the word science, which is just a systematic field of study. I've taken enough arguments about physics, I'm able to build a scientific field of physics. Make sense?
Yes.
One more interesting thing that he points out that I can't help but cover again is we observe qualitative things and we understand quantitative things. So what did Aristotle think? Only quantitative properties exist in reality. Color doesn't exist out there on something. Color is a subjective experience.
Did he actually say that?
We use different words than what he would have used. This is updated for modern usage of how these words typically come out.
So he knew that colors were more of an internalized.
It's how he viewed it.
Wow.
So all the qualitative properties are subjective. All the quantitative properties exist in reality. You have a height in reality. You have a weight in reality. These are measurable, objective properties. They actually exist in reality. You have a shape in reality. However, oddly enough, I never observe any of your quantitative properties directly. I never observe your height, for example. How do I observe your height? Through qualitative properties. How would I actually measure you? I would have you come stand up here, and I would see where I see a change in color between your hair and the board, and I would put some line right there. And it's through a difference in color is a completely qualitative property that I'm trying to determine what that is. And then again, I would take some meter stick and I would measure out some things. And how do I know that we've gotten to a meter, 1.3 meters or whatever it is? By looking at changes in colors, completely qualitative properties. And so even though it's the quantitative properties that exist in reality, we only observe qualitative properties. So all our subjective experience is qualitative properties. I never experience your height directly. I experience change in color directly. I never experience your weight directly. I experience seeing the pixels on the scale change directly, or whatever it is. So you only ever experience the qualitative properties, but it's the quantitative properties that exist in reality.
What if you pick up weight? Isn't that experiencing it directly?
If you pick up weight, isn't that experiencing it directly? Seeing something is experiencing it directly. Oh, no. Okay. So, no. You do not go pick up an object and have it communicate to you 7.49 kilograms. You could guess based off of the weight, the same way I could guess your height based off of the colors. I could guess based off of the pull I feel or whatever. But those are completely subjective things I'm feeling.
Okay.
So you can still guess at it, but it doesn't communicate to me directly what it is. And I have to, based off of my own subjective qualitative experiences, try and guess at what it is. And I could very easily be wrong about that. I'm not wrong about the fact that it was hard for me to hold it in my hands. That's a lot of weight, and I know that that's a lot of weight. So, that's an interesting one of his philosophy. We observe qualitative and understand quantitative. Qualitative are what we experience. Quantitative are what actually exist in reality, what properties objects actually possess. Okay. That was a quick recap on his epistemology, his most developed one. Any questions so far? Next ones will be a lot quicker. What was Aristotle's ethics? Well, essentially, you ought to live a happy life. What was happiness for him? Well, maybe talk about happiness for one more second. We remember our guy back flipping burgers at McDonald's. You ask him, why are you flipping burgers at McDonald's? Well, if I don't, they won't pay me. Why do you want to get paid? Well, I'm trying to buy this car. Why do you want to buy the car? And you keep asking him why. Ultimately, he's going to give an answer along the lines of, because I think it'll make me a happier person. So for Aristotle, happiness is the end of all human action. Ultimately, everything you deliberately do, everything you intentionally do, you do it because you think it is going to make you happier. Now, you could be right, you could be wrong. Your opinion as to what makes you happy is completely irrelevant in Aristotle's mind. Either you have the right opinion or you don't.
Yeah.
The same way that your opinion about what 4 plus 4 is completely irrelevant. You may know that's 8, you may not know that's 8. You may know what will make you happy, you may not know what will make you happy, but here's what will make you happy. And so what is happiness for him? It is activity of soul in accordance with the virtues. activity of soul in accordance with proper virtue, being your, first off, your habits that you form. So this is being temperate, being courageous. That table of virtues that we talked about, those were all your habits. Those are all your, he also calls them your ethical virtues, I think is what he called them. And then prudence. Prudence is the ability to deliberate well. Remember that deliberation is how you make a bunch of your ethical decisions.
Yeah.
And then finally, wisdom is what he meant by understanding knowledge over here. So you should cultivate good habits, prudence, and wisdom, and that's how you live a happy life. Now, where does something like wealth factor into this picture? Because something like wealth is a means to an end, and activity of soul is you actually doing things to accomplish ends. Money is useful towards helping you live a happy life. So it helps to enable you to live a happy life. So in that sense, it's good. It's useful. So for Aristotle, cultivating wealth is still a good thing. He's not saying it's impossible for you to live a happy life without any wealth. He's saying it's easier to live a happy life with wealth.
Yeah.
It enables you to accomplish more of the things that you're trying to accomplish, more good ends. Okay. So, for Aristotle, every object has an obligation to pursue its actuality. The same way that this piece of chalk has an obligation to fall to the floor. That's its purpose. And that's an internal purpose it has to the chalk. You have endowed in you the purpose to live a happy life. And so you actually have a moral obligation to pursue a happy life. So says Aristotle. That was it for ethics. Any questions there? Politics we cover kind of fast. Roughly, what's Aristotle's politics really summarizing here? What's the good political system? It's a political system with a large middle class. Not very many very rich people, not very many very poor people. Large middle class, focus on maintaining the middle class, and then have a good separation of power. So, separate up the powers into different types of systems, different ways that they're run. He used Sparta as a good example of a stable system that did a good job separating its powers. He said they have a monarchical element with their kings. They have an aristocratic element with their council of elders. And then they had a democratic element with their ephors. Those were the ones who would determine if the kings did anything right or wrong. So everyone answered to someone. You had the separation of powers, balancing it out.
Does separation mean something significantly different than like a distribution of power?
No, that's exactly what he means.
Okay.
He means distribute it, but distribute it into different types of systems. He doesn't mean have one democratic element is, to use more modern terms, he would not think that you should have a democratic president and a democratic legislative and a democratic judicial system. He would say then you pretty much set yourself up for the majority to rule over everyone. And so your poor majority masses are going to rule over everyone and you're going to get what he calls democracy.
Which he didn't
Oh
like.
my God, yes.
He didn't like democracy. He liked, I can't remember the word he used. For him, democracy is when the majority poor, the poor masses, overthrow the government, and in democracies, the wealth is seized from the wealthy people and redistributed amongst the classes. And so, for Aristotle, you are treading on the rights of your wealthy people when you get democracy in place. And you're just listening to whatever the majority wants. So he has that notion of what constitutes a democracy. It's when the majority rules and they rule for their self-interest.
It was his.
Any other questions on the politics?
It says friends.
Yes, it
It's not a
does.
question, but it's funny.
Probably a lot more typos in here. All right. And then finally, his ascetics. We didn't get to say much about this, but what makes something beautiful? Roughly speaking, it's something that is both useful and produces pleasure. It's a combination of these things that make something beautiful. And so, you talk about two chairs. If one chair is very well made, it can support the weight good, it lasts long, it's a more beautiful chair.
Yeah.
Because it's more useful for the purpose that its creator had in mind. So things that accomplish their function better are more beautiful, and things that give you pleasure, more pleasure, are more beautiful. Because you might also just take pleasure in looking at a beautiful chair. It's more useful, it's easier to use, it's actually a better thing. You might think about a saw. A saw that cuts better is more beautiful due to its usefulness. And there might be just some pleasure you get out of observing the saw.
Yeah.
Maybe not us, but a good craftsman, he might say, wow, that is a beautiful saw, just looking at it.
Yeah.
Polis.
Polis,
Is that right?
the polis is just a city.
Dang it.
He might have called it a polity.
Yeah, polity.
Something like that.
Which is
He might have called it a polity. It's just the city that's functioning correctly. And it's one where he wants the middle class ruling things. For the most part. He still likes the separation of powers. So,
Separation of power wills.
that is our quick recap of everything Aristotle. Go ahead.
What about things like sculptures and aesthetics that don't have a use except to look at?
Well, kind of.
They do have
So
these.
even marble one, why are you using marble rather than sandstone? You want it to last, for example. One that's quickly falling apart isn't as useful for its purpose.
Okay.
Sometimes, like in the Plato example, the usefulness of it is to
Immortalize Plato.
immortalize Plato.
If it doesn't look like Plato, it's not doing a very good job. Aaron's like, they made a statue of Bob. I was wondering when they do that. The sculptor says, no, it's Plato. What are you doing?
Yeah. Okay. I follow.
Any other comments or questions about
Yeah, I
Aristotle?
was just thinking about like how like when you see a beautiful painting, it might even be like gory and it could still be beautiful because it has it portrays a useful message. If that makes sense.
Could be. Now, keep in mind that for Aristotle, these have nothing to do with your opinion. Something is or is not beautiful, and you either have good taste or bad taste. Someone with good taste is someone who better recognizes the beautiful things. And someone with bad taste is someone who's worse at recognizing the beautiful things.
I like that.
Doesn't
Yeah.
really
And so a carpenter has really good taste in handsaws.
doesn't really define what beauty is.
It's giving you your criterion for determining whether or not something is beautiful. The same way, how did you know that something's good? He doesn't really define good.
Isn't that a circular definition? To use.
It's given a criteria for how we measure whether or not that's happening. So something is beautiful to the extent that it cultivates these things.
That makes sense.
Okay. Make sense with those? And again, you can see following exactly what the outline Socrates laid down. Remember, Socrates brought the focus in philosophy to this notion that there is objective and absolute good, truth, and beauty. And from there on out, Plato and Aristotle were vindicating him in that belief and setting up complete systems of philosophy trying to capture those things. So it's amazing what Socrates shot off here. And that ends the heights of philosophy. Asterisk. As far as for people we call philosophers. Science and mathematics still has a good development.
You don't think Nietzsche's was good?
No, absolutely not. But any other questions about Aristotle before we move on to Alexander the Great?
Is it called polity?
Polity is what I'm guessing he called his government system.
I think it's.
All right, so with that, we're now ready to cover our next chunk of history. Remember the last chunk of history we covered was the Peloponnesian Wars. So now we're going to cover Alexander the Great, his years 356 to 323, died at 32. Died young.
Died at 36.
36? Did I get that wrong?
It's not
No.
base, right?
Subtract 33 from that, get you there. But I don't think he had his birthday yet. I think he died at 32. You can double check. Go ahead and check me on that.
I know we kind of moved on, but I think he changed the constitutional democracy. Is what I think how some people define polis.
Kind of. The problem is
Oh, you're right.
every
That means
single...
Mr. James wrong.
America was the best. He
America's
wanted
number
a
one.
republic.
He would have liked a lot of elements in the American Constitution. But understand that all these Greek city-states had their own constitutions. They were all constitutional governments. So Sparta was a constitutional government, and they had their constitution. Right? And so you might think, why on earth would Spartans rather live in Sparta, where things are so harsh, as opposed to, let themselves be conquered by the Persians and take things nice and easy and relaxed? Better to be a slave in Persia than a citizen of Sparta. Life's way easier. Now, why would the Spartans do that?
Wow.
Because these difficulties that they put on themselves, they choose those, they subscribe to those. And so to give you a quote that gets you at the Spartan mindset, what do they say? I do the things that you won't so I can continue to do the things that you can't. I hold myself to higher standards so I can continue to outperform you. That's why we do it. And so they're not slaves to their government. It's a constitution.
Well,
And they willingly take on that form of government. A constitution is you, as a group of citizens, choosing, here's the powers that we're going to give up and allow our government to have over us.
yeah.
It's not like when a king comes and conquers and says, okay, I'm boss now, here's what's going to happen. You never agreed to be the subject of Xerxes. Xerxes conquered you, and he put the laws in place. It's not a constitution. You're not a citizen. In the Greek thinking of it, you're a slave in the Greek thinking of it.
Yeah.
Remember, that was their whole big problem with the Greco-Persian Wars. What was their problem with Xerxes? Or Darius is who it initially was. He says, you have to pay some money. They said, fine, yep, we have political contracts where we have to do that. You have to contribute troops at times of war. Yeah, we have contracts with each other where we have to do that. You have to give me earth and water, which is like prostrate before me. Say, no, now you're crossing the line. We are not your slaves. We are citizens agreeing to be in this political contract with you. And to give you earth and water is beneath the dignity of any free man, of any citizen.
Well, Mr. J said there's a lot more than earth and water. It was taxes and all that.
And the taxes and all that isn't what they took issue with. Because they already have these agreements with each other. For example, Sparta was already having people pay to them.
Yeah.
And no one blinked an eye about that. Athens, it took a while for them to start calling it Athens Empire, but when they set their Delian League, it was a similar thing.
So what exactly did earth and water mean?
Showing.
It was a way of, it's like you prostrating yourself before a king, except for as a society.
It's dominance.
So is it more like you, I don't know, it's almost like, hey, you can be free, but just pretend to be subservient to me, but I'm not going to require you to do any slave stuff. I don't know.
Submit yourself.
I'm not going to require you to do any slave stuff. Just go ahead and prostrate yourself and we're good.
Yeah.
He said, no, that is beneath the dignity of a free man.
Interesting.
Basically.
And so if you want me to bow, you're going to have to come meet me. And one of us is going to die in the process, so you better be ready.
So it was just the act of bowing, even though it didn't technically require anything else.
Yeah.
That's what it symbolizes. Yes.
Interesting.
And so that's what crossed the line for it. Not a chance. No way.
That was a mistake.
They won the war.
No.
Oh, the Persians. That was their mistake, asking for that.
Yeah, that was a
Yeah,
mistake.
and there's the famous stories about getting the earth and water. They did not treat the envoys well. They were asking for earth and water. The famous one, you want earth and water, kicked him down a well. That's where you get it. Go get it for your king. We're not giving it to you.
It didn't go well for the people on the right, the purple people.
All right. Those Asians.
So,
No, they had souls. It was they didn't have spirit.
oh, yeah.
They had civilization without spirit, and these Macedonians had spirit without civilization.
No, they just happened to be in the
No
wrong place at
spirit.
the wrong time.
Okay. So now, after the Peloponnesian Wars, remember, after the Peloponnesian Wars, there was just tons of infighting in Greece. And city-states just constantly kind of destroying their resources with time as a war amongst themselves in the Peloponnesian Wars. Mostly it was Athens versus Sparta. Sparta ends up winning that, but Sparta doesn't hang on to control for long. And then it's Thebes who's kind of the big boy on the block, then Athens kind of having a comeback. And at the time that a guy by the name of Philip up in Macedon comes to power, it's Athens and Thebes that are kind of the big boys on the block. In terms of the Peloponnesian Wars, Thebes is pretty much the only city that really comes out of it better than they were before the Peloponnesian Wars. Pretty much everyone else is worse off.
Yeah.
So we then get Philip of Macedon. Now, the Macedonians up here, prior to Philip, they lived as, they were technically a kingdom, but it was also a kingdom composed of a bunch of individual tribes. So you had the head of all the tribes, and they kind of would or would not come under the king to the extent that the king could exert authority over them. It's kind of like a feudal system later in Europe, where each guy has his own little tribe, and then they're supposed to come under the king, but maybe they do, maybe they don't. Tons of infighting going on in Macedonia. Anytime power changes hand, it's pretty much a fight to the death. Whoever comes out on top, they were meant to be king. So it's not even frowned upon by them. One king dies, there's 4 people who could potentially be the next king. They're all going to fight each other to the death. Not directly, but through whatever, poisons, assassinations, whatever they do, to try and hurry up and cultivate power and be the next one in charge. So things were crazy complex in Macedonia, and it was not an organized system as one kingdom, really. It was more a bunch of tribes out for themselves with a king at the top who, in a crisis, we would actually banner around and go deal with whatever the crisis was. Philip changed that. So when Philip becomes the king of Macedonia, he starts controlling it with a firm hand. He starts putting a bunch of changes in place to make the king very strong. One of the first things he does, for example, is he creates a standing army. He's no longer going to rely upon tribes to come to him when he needs the tribes to come to him. He's going to have these people that your job is to be in the military. And he's going to collect taxes from the tribe, and he's going to be the one to pay for the military. And the military answers to him.
Yeah.
So that's... Huh?
It's federal term.
Yes. I understand up until now, a standing army wasn't really much of a thing in a lot of places. That you just pay troops to always be there. For most of the Greeks, your hoplites were your citizens. And when it was time for the citizens to go out and fight, they would go out and fight. They were citizens warriors who dedicated part of their time. Sparta kind of did. They had their standing army. Their citizens were always ready to go. But outside of that, you didn't really have your professional soldier. That's what he did. And the people who went to that profession really became mercenaries and would just travel around being hired by whomever.
Yeah.
It wasn't the army that answers to you, your kingdom. It was mercenaries that answer to whoever paid them. So he gets an actual standing army. And he makes innovations on top of what the Greeks already had in place. The 2 major innovations that he makes is he introduces a new sort of phalanx. You remember the Greek phalanx? The soldiers piled together, they got their big shields, and they got their spears.
Yeah.
Right?
And they stack up onto each other.
And they stack up onto each other. But the point is, when you come at them, it's just a wall of shields and spears.
Yeah.
And good luck getting to them.
Mm-hmm.
So, heavy armed infantry with those spears. What did Philip do? He introduced what we now call the Macedonian phalanx, which is, he said, let's keep going. Let's make the spears twice as long. But now the soldiers had to operate the spears with 2 hands, which meant we had to make the shields a lot smaller. So the shield's a lot smaller.
Oh, just put it on his arm. I see.
I think some of them also sometimes actually would hang around the neck.
The shields?
Yes.
Oh, so they had
Like
a strap
Just
around
like
their
an
head.
armor.
So
it's like
I've heard it both ways. So I'm not sure which it was. But the point is, it wasn't nearly as big of a shield as what the phalanx was the Greeks were using, the hoplites were using.
Alexander did that.
No, that's his dad,
Okay.
Philip. Understandable
Oh,
mix-up.
Didn't he change the system, the phalanx?
That's what we're talking about.
Yeah.
No, Alexander.
No,
apparently it's this
his
guy.
dad Philip did. Alexander used it. So we're talking about Philip. Alexander is his son. We're talking about the father of Alexander the Great. Okay.
He was set.
So he changed the Greek phalanx to double the length of your spear, smaller shield. Now the problem that you have with that, remember one of the problems with the phalanx is it's very hard to maneuver, it's very hard to turn.
Yeah.
And if you make the spears even longer,
It's even more hard.
it's even harder. So what he ended up doing is he created phalanxes that had the super long spears, but then on the flanks he had regular Greek phalanxes with the shorter spears that were easier to maneuver.
It's a wound.
And then you would have your missile troops on the flanks there to protect the side. Your missile troops are people who like throw javelins, archers, spears.
Really? And they weren't like,
It's your light infantry.
they weren't behind by chance?
Well, they probably.
No, they protect the flank side because you're very vulnerable from the side here. So these are very mobile troops. These are somewhat mobile troops. These, not a chance. They gotta go straight forward.
Was cavalry a thing at the time?
Yes, and then on top of that, that's another thing that he introduces. Cavalry, prior to this, cavalry is used, but they're largely used the same way that these guys are used. To quickly get in there, throw some projectiles, and get out. What he introduces is, not introduces, but we can say introduces. They're not the first, but they're basically the first. Introduces the notion of heavy cavalry,
When it's like actually fight.
where they're heavily armed and they're going to charge into the heat of the fight. And that's where they're actually going to do their fighting. And so yes, on top of that, you would have your cavalry units protecting the flanks here. I don't know if you guys are used to that. Standard battlefield markings.
I am curious.
The one line is
about that in the phalanx. I know it's a detail, but I imagine there was some type of counterweight when it was to holding the spear, so that.
I have no clue the actual makeup of the spear. So
Just
I don't know. Because you might think counterweight would be nice, but then it's more weight that you're hauling around.
Yeah,
So I have no
was
idea.
thinking the same thing.
Or if they just make it long enough that you can.
But you'd always have to be pushing down one. I don't know.
They were just stronger.
Either way.
Can't argue with that.
So those are two major changes. Is we're going to use heavy cavalry, and we're going to introduce our middle heavy infantry is going to be these ones with the extra long spears. And they're going to just slaughter you before you can even get close enough to fight. Now, they're also the first one with their heavy cavalry to use what are called shock tactics. Keep in mind that at this time, the majority of battles, when you fight a battle, the majority of the casualties don't happen during the actual fighting. The majority of the casualties happen when one army decides to try and flee the battlefield. That's where the majority of your casualties happen.
Yeah.
And so shock cavalry is good at shocking your enemy,
Get him to run.
getting them scared.
Yeah.
Whichever one was terrified of Greek soldiers for this.
Well,
That's how he got so much land.
heavy cavalry was Alexander's favorite. He loves these boys, and this is who he plays with. And this is who he leads,
And
the
he
heavy
just
cavalry.
run the horses into the.
They were the first ones that I know of to introduce the wedge formation. So you have one horse here, 3 horses here, 5 horses here. And so you charge at a gap, and you push the soldiers aside. And then the horses keep feeding through, knocking them back. And it can penetrate these holes in your
That's vicious.
lineup.
What sort of armor did they have? I know this is way too detailed. I'm just.
You'll have to go look at
Is
pictures.
there iron around this?
Yeah.
So, like iron plating or.
Well, this is in Persian.
Well, they would have had some bronze, they would have had some iron, but it depends
That's-
upon what you're talking about.
The Persians weren't.
But no, they're not wearing full plate armor, for sure. And no, it's not like that on horses is. This isn't like the horses like with a lance now, ready to just. This isn't medieval stuff.
Nice stuff, yeah.
Yeah, that's huge. A lot of changes between now and then. They were heavily armed based off of the criteria of the day. And if you look at them, you'd say you're missing a lot of stuff.
What did it look like? Anyway,
Okay, so those were the innovations that Philip made to the Macedonian army. On top of that, he started using his army to expand. Mostly, he took a bunch of land over here, which is where a bunch of gold mines were. So he's expanding Macedonia. Macedonia used to be smaller. He's expanding Macedonia, and basically he needs to be conquering land and getting funding as fast as he's growing to keep paying for his expansion. So he's taking a huge gamble here. And so he starts expanding out. He's going to expand now down into Greece. Expanding down into Greece at the time that he chooses to do it. The two major guys on the block at the time are Athens and Thebes. They're kind of the toughest ones. And so, now there's a lot of fighting going on. There's something that's called like the Third Religious War, I think it's called, or something like that. Bunch of infighting, but anyways, Philip ends up coming down, fighting them in one decisive battle. Battle of Chaeronea, I think is how you pronounce that. So the Battle of Chaeronea, this is the decisive battle. This is Athens and Thebes united against Macedonia. And at the time, Alexander the Great was 18. He participated in this battle, and he was leading what would come to be called the companions, his companion cavalry. Now, some people say there was no actual cavalry in this battle, and he was just leading them as footmen. Nonetheless, this notion of his companions, the soldiers that fight with Alexander the Great, was already established by the time he was 18.
It's the same.
Now, this battle is one that Macedonia wins. And it was a decisive battle. It utterly defeats Athens and Thebes' armies.
Wow.
We don't have a lot of details on the battle, unfortunately. We just know the result. And so the consequence is they set up what is called the League of Corinth. Why does it have that name? Sometimes it's just where they come up with the treaty that you get the name of these things. So they come to have what we call the League of Corinth, which is all the yellow here. And the League of Corinth is basically just, it's kind of like the Delian League that Athens had, except for now, Philip's at the head of it. And so they basically have to contribute money and troops to Philip.
What's up with the overlap in like Thessaly and stuff?
It's showing different ways that Macedonia had it. So everything that's Macedonia on this map is this, all the brown, all down through Greece, not Sparta. So not blue, not purple, is now Macedonia.
Like these are the stages of conquering?
No. So here's Macedonia proper. Here's Thrace, which now answers to Philip. Philip goes in there, conquers them, and says, you can still be your own thing, but here's what you contribute to us.
The next, yeah, so second war is Thrace, okay.
Well, he went and he did Thrace before he
Okay.
came down here and conquered these guys. So he did Thrace, he did Thessaly, and then he did the Greeks.
Yeah, so,
So
the
Thessaly-
color variation is showing the time of conquering, isn't it?
No, it's just showing their relation here. So the light brown is dependent territories.
Oh, it's a type of territory.
It's a type of territory.
Gotcha.
So it's just that Thessaly is like the in between of the Corinth League and Macedonia.
Yep, so just marking on the map who's who.
Yeah.
But it's all coming under the kingdom of Macedonia. Everything that's not purple and not blue is technically part of the kingdom of Macedonia. And it's just highlighting the different places so that you can see them. Make sense?
Mhm.
Yep.
So these were separate political entities, but they all came under Philip. The same way that in America we have different states, but we all come under the federal government. Okay, so, and then eventually, not too many years later, Philip, as he's getting ready, putting together his big army, he has his desire to go and invade Persia, and he is assassinated, which is the norm in Macedonia.
Do we know who assassinated?
There's going to be all sorts of speculation. I don't know if it's something definitively known or not.
Okay.
I would guess not, but I have no idea. And so ultimately it's going to fall to Alexander. So let's briefly talk about Alexander. So Alexander, born 356 BC to Olympias.
Fourth wife.
He's the fourth wife of Philip, not even the first wife. The point there being is it was not obvious that Alexander is going to be Philip's successor. That's something that he ultimately has to fight for. Okay. And early on, there were already legends that Philip wasn't Alexander's dad. And in fact, he was the son of Zeus. And that Zeus impregnated Olympias.
It's real.
Makes sense.
So early on, we get these notions of he must somehow be a demigod.
This is so good.
He's so cool.
Now, we've already talked about this. He was tutored by Aristotle from the age 13 to 16.
Was he really?
Yes.
Wow.
I heard that Philip paid Aristotle a lot of money for him to have direct tutorage.
It would have had to have been a decent amount for Aristotle to decide to go do that. I have no clue how much he was paid, but yes, Aristotle was the teacher to Alexander and other noble youths in Macedonia. So it wasn't just
I heard
Alexander
it
the
was
Great.
a direct relationship between the two.
Well, it's a direct relationship in the sense that you and I have a direct relationship. Except for in their education, I'm not your only teacher.
So Aristotle was like the most
Yeah.
prominent teacher, apparently, if that was the case.
He was the most prominent teacher in Alexander the Great's life from this time to this time, most likely.
Wow.
Yeah. By far.
Along with people that are going to be Alexander the Great's friends and generals, including Ptolemy and Cassander. Most important, Ptolemy. Aristotle's most important student right there. Not Alexander the Great, Ptolemy is Aristotle's most important student in terms of continuing what it is he taught
Philosophy.
and keeping Aristotle's philosophy alive. Alexander the Great does a good job spreading Hellenistic culture all over, but
Yeah.
Ptolemy is the important one.
Say Hellenistic.
Hellenistic.
That's the teacher.
What's that?
The Hellenes are people from that Greek peninsula.
Oh.
So the Macedonians are Hellenes.
Okay.
So the Greeks would say they're not really Greeks, but they're still Hellenes.
Yeah, in the same region.
Yes. So they still kind of count. Macedonians, you know, they half count.
They're not on the other side of the pond.
Yeah. The Asians, the Egyptians, no, they don't count. You go too far north, they don't count anymore. So the Greeks are the real guys, and the Macedonians, they were always viewed as kind of the backwater neighbors of the Greeks.
I can kind of see why they.
It's kind of like how you might think an East Coast person thinks of someone from the Deep South.
Huh.
Yeah, they're American, but I'm better than them, you know. That would have been your standard Greek's view of a Macedonian.
Did the Macedonians believe in like Greek mythology and stuff?
Tons of overlap.
Overlap?
Culture-wise, tons of overlap. I don't know exactly what their pantheon was, but I imagine very similar beliefs.
I imagine they were also constantly getting in the middle of battles and wars going on between everybody.
Yes,
They were
everyone's
right-
involved in everyone's business.
They were right in the way.
And there was continual contestation between Macedonia and Athens for gold mines that we were talking about earlier. So
All that
tons of conflicts going on. They all know each other very well. They're all, yeah. And you can already see, obviously, think about itself as Zeus, and Mount Olympus is over there separating Macedonia from the rest of inland Greece. So lots of connections. Anyways. So tutored by Alexander the Great, along with some of his friends, other high nobles in Macedonian society. Now, when Philip went off to go fight the Thracians, when Philip started expanding his culture, before he went down and conquered the Greeks, he kind of expanded out up north and a little bit south. While he was out doing that, Alexander the Great, already at the age of 16, was selected to be his regent. So he's already standing out and making himself very noticeable, and so he's coming to be a very natural choice for Philip's successor.
How many kids did Philip have?
I have no idea.
Like a lot? Or was it like...
I have no
Four
idea.
wives, I mean,
No ladder.
what's that?
No, this is the fourth wife. We have no clue if he had 4 wives,
All at the same time.
or if he had 8 wives.
Oh, well, it's still.
I have no idea how many kids he had.
Okay.
I know that Alexander the Great, when he comes to power, does assassinate many of his siblings.
Jeez.
You've got to, otherwise there's going to be a contestation for power.
Right.
You might think it's brutal to kill that 12-year-old,
Power's hard.
but if you wait 10 years, he's going to come back and say, you stole what's mine.
And way more lives.
And now it's a lot harder to kill him. It was easy when he was 12.
Oh my goodness.
It's true.
22-year-old, he can bump a fight.
That's insane. That's
I'm
crazy.
pursuing happiness right now.
That's a pretty common thing.
Did you just kill your brother?
Yeah, to have to.
Alright, anyway, so the Battle of Coronea,
There is no for lying.
that now happens when Alexander is 18. He's leading his companions, and he's already fighting with some of his friends who are going to become future generals in his army. Okay, so now 2 years later, by the time Alexander the Great is 20, Philip is assassinated. And Alexander the Great is proclaimed king as one of the people to contest. It wasn't uncontested, he had to fight for it, he had to kill rivals. Now, this says Philip, this should be Alexander. Call him Alex. Alright, so when Philip gets assassinated, everyone that is in the Macedonian Empire, what are they thinking?
When Philip dies?
Yeah, good time to revolt. Right?
'Cause
The strong, powerful king is dead. Good time to revolt. So the Thracians, the Thessalonians, the Greeks, everyone decides that now's a good time to revolt. And so Alexander has to quickly start consolidating power. He has to kill other princes who are trying to take control. He has to kill some of his cousins. He has to deal with some of the generals of Philip who thought that they might be able to get the army and thereby take control. And he has to quickly put down revolts through Greece. So his first year as king is pretty much running all over the map, putting out fires.
Wow.
Now he was particularly angry with the Greeks for rebelling against him. They kind of did the thing where we promise we won't, and then they did right when he turned his back, sort of thing. And so, where they made their stand was in Thebes. The reason that they made their stand in Thebes is because Thebes had amazing walls. Up till now, if there was a place to go be in Greece during all this time, pick Thebes.
It's not Athens?
No. Remember, the Persians burned Athens to the ground once.
Oh shoot.
Yeah, it's so
Even with the really cool wall.
The Spartans conquered them and forced them to take it down.
Yeah.
Yeah, the really wall. That's gone.
Are the Spartans a part of any of this, or are they just...
The Spartans are now kind of nobodies. They're
Okay, we
kind of
find
irrelevant
out
now.
why they did not conquer the Spartans then.
The Spartan population just dies off and they get less and less control.
But they.
And in fact, a lot of Spartan wealth came from over here. This is where the Helots were from. So they went and they got all the land that was provided for Sparta. Now, it's not like Sparta wasn't formidable. It's just like what you have to fight for what you have to get.
It's not worth it. So
It's like you're trying to mug a 240-pound man who's ripped for $10. It's like, it's not worth it. Okay?
That's so funny.
We just don't care. So it was largely, they're not worth the fight that it would take. The payoff's not worth the fight.
That's fine.
So anyways, Thebes has their big walls that they all get behind. And they decide that they're going to make their stand against Alexander. And they're shocked by how fast he shows up. Basically, when they thought Alexander went away and they decided to throw the rebellion, he turned around and he was back just like that. They thought he was going to be tied down to other places, so they were shocked to see him. But they decide that they're still not going to listen to it. They decide they're going to fight Alexander, make it very clear. I think they even kill one of the envoys that he sends to try and reason with him. They're pretty flippant about it.
They have a habit.
Huh?
Habit of killing envoy.
Well, they had good reason to be a little bit arrogant. Their walls. They had big, amazing walls, and the idea of someone getting through those walls, they could withstand forever, they thought. No problem. So they end up withstanding, and Alexander the Great takes Thebes. We won't bother with going over all the siege.
Was it the double wall one?
You might be thinking of either Carthage or Byzantine.
Okay, never mind.
But they did have internal walls inside the walls. That's very normal.
No,
And
wait,
then they had some wooden walls
Alexander-
outside.
Was it Alexander that built the wall?
Oh, you're thinking of Julius Caesar.
Dang it, I'm way off.
Okay. Anyways, so Alexander ends up having to siege the city, ultimately taken by force, and he is infuriated when he does this. So he burns Thebes to the ground, and he kills off a good portion of the population and sells the rest off into slavery. Now, this was a massive shock to the ancient world. The idea that Thebes could be burned to the ground. This would be as much of a shock if you woke up tomorrow and you found out New York City is off the map. It was destroyed. It's gone.
Wow.
This was a massive shock to the ancient world. And the rest of Greece was terrified. And so, with that little bit, they hated him, but they were also terrified of him.
More than Greece, even the Persians, they were terrified when he turned on them.
Well, we'll get to the Persians. But for now, the rest of Greece kind of falls in line. And they realize we can't push around this 20-year-old kid like we thought. We thought things were going to be easy when Philip died. Boy, were we wrong. And so now Alexander is ready to pick up with the plans that his father had to go into Persia. And in 334, he crosses the Hellespont into Asia Minor, taking the very path that Xerxes used to come when Xerxes came and burned Athens to the ground. Now he's going to take that path into Persia. Same path. With me so far? Okay. Remind ourselves of what Persia was during the Grecian-Persian Wars. Here's Greece. And remember, it wasn't all of Greece united against them. It was part of Greece against Persia. And even Macedonia was part of the Persians, one of Persia's allies during that fight.
Yeah.
They were part of Persia. So now we're over here, crossing the Hellespont into Asia Minor. Is it right there? Right there. Crossing. I'm not sure where the Hellespont is. It's one of those two crossings.
It would make sense it'd be the left one.
I know, but I think Byzantium is closer over here than it is there. I don't know. One of the two. The next map will probably tell us. The point is, Persian Empire, Macedonia, even though they've got some things going for them, Macedonia still ignores Sparta. It's kind of that against Persia. And this still is going to look like it's a very one-sided battle. And in terms of who has the resources to fight this battle, it's Persia. No question about it.
What makes you say
Even
that?
if they.
Because
Okay.
they're huge.
Well, they're
They're
massive.
huge. They have far more soldiers to call upon. They're far wealthier. He's already in money trouble, paying for the standing army. He's got to expand to even keep paying his troops.
How many years was this since the last war where they got their butt kicked?
So
The Persian War? Or
the first one starts around 511. We're now at 334.
Whoa, so it's been a while.
It's
No,
been a
it's
while.
2 years.
Generations have come and gone.
200 years.
Not quite 200, but getting there.
511, 3, okay.
Oh, wait, sorry.
Yeah,
I'm doing
five.
different math. No, okay. 511.
Okay,
Yeah, okay.
so here's the army that Alexander the Great is marching into Asia Minor with. Here's what he's going to take on the Persians with. So first off, you have about 9,000 men in the Macedonian phalanx. Those were going to be the ones with the really long spears. And I think that this is one. No, that looks like a regular Greek phalanx
1, 2, 3.
because they got
4,
kind of the
5.
big shields.
That's 5 spears.
Oh, we get the idea. And
But
so-
yeah, you get the idea. So something like that, one with really long spears. Then about 15,000 regular Greek phalanx soldiers. Those were going to be the ones in the same formation but shorter spears. And then 8,000 skirmishers. Those are going to be people who throw spears and javelins, stuff like that. 5,000 cavalry, and then 3,000 other just various types of units from various different lands.
Suppliers.
No, they're still going to be fighting personnel.
Oh.
It's just that they're very niche for their very specific thing.
Niche.
Archery, I think.
I think it was on Crete. They were using archers regularly.
Who is Crete fighting?
Archers were also definitely a thing with Persia. Crete at the time isn't really fighting anyone, and they have good alliance with Sparta, and it's one of the reasons that Sparta's kind of safe. They've always been friends with Crete. They have similar government styles. And they both consider themselves Dorians. But that's kind of a different thing. So here's the army that he's going with, roughly 40,000 troops invading Persia. Persia has access to a lot more than 40,000 troops.
And he would fight in the lead, is what it was.
Yeah, he was on the top of it.
Yeah, let me, let's see, this is going to be the first battle. Let me do this map and then we'll go back to that. Okay, so the Hellespont is right there. Okay, good. So there's the Hellespont. Anyways, this is Alexander the Great's path, just showing it all on one map.
Wow.
And we'll take you through the pieces that we go through at one time. So he crossed the Hellespont. And now he comes over here. Our first battle is going to be the Battle at Granicus. That's the name of a river there. Fighting at a river. When Alexander the Great invades into Asia Minor, remember that the Persian Empire is split up kind of into states. They call it satraps. And so Lydia is its own little satrap here.
Okay.
Or is that what they call it? Or is that what they call the governor?
I think that's right.
I don't remember.
The governor there might have been called the satrap, and this was like a satrapy, or the government was a satrapy, and this was a satrap. One of the two.
Like that.
Something
Yeah,
like that.
it's in-
The point is, the local governor here, there was a conversation. What do we do? Alexander, well, the Greeks are coming. The Macedonians are coming. They didn't, Alexander the Great, still not really anybody in the world yet. And so they were debating, what should we do to deal with him? One of the suggestions was to go scorched earth policy, burn back all the way back to our capital, and that way he doesn't have any supplies. Or we could go find a position that we like and take the fight to him. And they were kind of indecisive on this point. And so what they ended up doing is, at one point, the Persians are going to be up here in the red. They go and they do, maybe go back to that map for a sec. They go at the Battle of Granicus and they do get an army here to line up and face him. But Alexander the Great is worried that they're going to change their mind and go scorched earth policy. So he kind of knows what they're thinking. He wants this fight, and he wants it back. So Alexander the Great takes half his army and basically puts in double time, and he's going to try and get them while they're still willing to fight before they change their mind. So that's why our numbers off are going to be a little bit weird here. So the Persians are going to hold this river with 20,000 troops. Alexander the Great, I guess he took 18. So left 22,000 behind because we got to move fast. Hurry up and catch them. And so the Persians line up on the opposite side of this river. It's a kind of a shallow river, but it's roughly 60 feet wide. So a wide river, but shallow, one that you can cross. And they're going to line up on this side. The line through it, that is cavalry. So these are units of cavalry. All these Persians are on horses with projectiles that they intend to throw at them as they attempt to cross this river. And then after that, you can engage them with the sword. They also had Greek mercenaries. These would have been Greek hoplites. And for whatever reason, they kept them back in reserve for the battle and didn't line them up. And the speculation is that they weren't sure if they could trust the Greek mercenaries to fight against these Macedonians. And how did Alexander the Great line up his army? He lined up his phalanx right here. These guys are kind of like the phalanx. You can kind of think about them as a more mobile version of the phalanx. But so you got your phalanx here, and then you've got your cavalry over here with some missile troops to protect them. And then you've got your cavalry over here with some missile troops to protect them. And then Alexander the Great, the head of that one. His companion cavalry, the cavalry that he rode with. These were heavy cavalry intended for shock warfare. Now when they showed up, they see the Persians here. Rule number one in one of these battles, you do not want to fight crossing a river. Rule number two, you do not want to fight uphill. This is higher terrain, this is lower terrain. It's very easy that these guys could just attack you as you're crossing the river, then go up the hill and force you to come up the hill and fight you again. You don't want that. As Alexander showed up here, it was getting close to sunset, and so his generals wanted him to wait until tomorrow to attack. He instead lines up and just launches the attack. Shocks them. So this side, him with his cavalry, is quickly running across, trying to tie these guys down so that his infantry can get across the river undisturbed, so that they're not getting pelted as they cross the river. Almost all the fighting in the battle happens on this side. It happens very fast. It's over within, I think, some sources say an hour.
Wow.
So he goes and he charges and he starts pushing them back so that his infantry can come and start crossing the river undisturbed while he holds them back. Once the infantry come back and he's able to push these guys back far enough, Alexander the Great then cuts into the middle, trying to charge at the enemy general. basically drive him off the field. So they push him back, he tries cutting in. Once he gets behind these cavalry, you're able to come back. Once you're attacking from behind, it's over.
Mm-hmm.
So this battle is almost over as fast as it starts. So quickly able to push these guys back, tie them down. Once you get across the river, they're terrified, they can't fight the battle anymore. They're going to be able to flee the battlefield really quick because they're all on horseback, all the Persians. The battle happened so fast that the Greeks, mercenaries here, didn't even have time to get lined up. And so, when all the Persians flee, and now it's just them with the Greeks, they quickly surround the Greeks, and Alexander kills them all.
Wow.
I think some of them were sold as slaves, but they asked for mercy. He could have easily tried to incorporate them in his army or whatever, but no, he kills them, or he kills, I think it's like, I can't remember what portion. He kills a bunch of them, and possibly sells some of them into slavery too. Trying to send a very clear message. He's here fighting for the Greeks. He views this as basically tyranny.
Traitors.
Yeah, you're traitors. This isn't some petty fight that Persia has between some client kingdom and okay, you go be a mercenary for Persia. You're being a mercenary for Persia fighting against the Greeks now. This is tyranny, this is unacceptable. He's trying to make it very clear to the rest of the Greeks, you will not fight as mercenaries for Persia. If you're going to fight, you're going to fight with the Greeks. So, no mercy there. And people are shocked by it. Kind of like they were shocked by White Dead Thebes. Anyways, casualties. Alexander loses 115 men. Persians lose 5,000 to 6,000, the majority of them being those Greek mercenaries. Because once these guys routed, they could basically just run off the battlefield. It's one of the reasons it was so good that they used cavalry, easy to get away. So completely one-sided victory for the Greeks. And so Alexander gets that. He wins at the Granicus. And now the question comes, what are we going to do next? So first off, the Persian flees, the satrap flees, and the next time that they fight, it's going to be the king. The king at the time is now Darius again, Darius III. So it's Darius fighting the Greeks again. And he's going to start mobilizing all of Persia to put up an army to go deal with Alexander. So Persia starts mobilizing. Now, there's one place that the Greeks obviously are inferior to the Persians, or at least where Alexander is, and that is on sea. He cannot just go marching along on land and let Persia come behind him with fleets and start cutting off his supply chains and his communication chains. And the Macedonians, they had a great land army, not much of a fleet. So Alexander does something very bold because he's also running out of wealth. He decides he's done with his navy for the most part. He's done paying for ships, too expensive. Can't afford it. He's going to focus on just his land army. And he decides what he's going to do is he's going to come and conquer all these coastal ports so that the Persians have nowhere to supply their fleet from or to launch attacks from.
To get around.
Right, so that if the Persians do try and launch attack, there's nowhere for them to supply all the way to where they're trying to launch the attack. That's the idea there. So he's going to go start taking these coastal towns. So that's what he's going to do next is start conquering Lydia, focusing on taking these coastal towns. Now, first thing he does is go to Sardis, the capital. Why does he go to Sardis? Well, money for the most part, and set up whatever government he's going to have run this area while he continues his war. Then he's going to continue, he comes down to Ephesus. Ephesus, remember, this is one of your Greek city-states. So they pretty much say, yep, you're our new ruler. But when he comes to Miletus, it's Miletus here who is going to largely stand against him. Now, why is Miletus standing against him? Miletus stands against him. They say, we want to be friends with both the Persians and the Greeks. We kind of want to stay outside this battle. We don't want to get involved. Alexander the Great says that's a no-go, essentially ends up having to siege Miletus and take control of it that way. So he starts capturing these naval cities. Any one of them that stand up against him ends up sieging them and taking them, and that's his strategy. We're not going to let Persia have any naval bases to operate from. Once he gets those, he goes marching along, another naval base, and then he's going to come up here and he's going to go to Gordium before he goes down into Syria. Famous story about what he does in Gordium. In Gordium, there was a big famous knot called the Gordian Knot, and the legend was whoever could undo the knot would rule all of Asia. So, Alexander the Great famously went up to the knot and cut it with his sword in half. There we go, I undid the knot. So good omen for him ruling the rest of Asia. All right, and so now he marches down into Syria. So comes up through here, marching down into Syria. And by the time he gets down here, past this town Issus, Darius, the Persian king, now has his army ready. And so Alexander the Great, as he's marching down the coastal path, there comes a point where he's between a mountain and the sea. And what Darius does is he comes up behind him, cutting off his supplies, forcing Alexander to have to turn around and fight him on the battlefield of his choosing. So that's going to happen over here at Issus, and the next battle is going to be the Battle of Issus. Go ahead.
It's kind of irrelevant what you're saying, but looking at the map, there are so many Alexandrias.
Yes. Alexander went around, and whenever he got bored, he built a city, and he called it Alexandria. There's lots of cities named Alexandria. And yes, those are ones that he built along the way.
And then there's like 2 Alexes I see. No, 3. 3 Alexes. Like 10 Alexandrias.
Yes. Lots of Alexandrias.
Why not?
When you're saying, like, it was almost
This is not Alexandria.
notable how
Yeah,
he conquered all of these other cities, and I assume they were extremely swift.
Some of them were more dragged out, some of them were more swift. There's lots of clever fighting going on. We got to just cover the 3 big battles.
Right.
So, unfortunately, we have to skip a lot of detail. Okay, but now Darius comes up to him. So, blue is Alexander. He comes down here. Darius takes his army, comes down here behind him. Alexander realizes, uh-oh, my supply chains have been cut off. I've got to go back and deal with this army. Right? So Issus is right there. That's what the battle is named after, but it happens over here on this river. The Panaris River? Not sure. Over here on the Panaris River. So this is where Darius sets himself up. So zoomed in now, here's the river. So Darius sets himself up. Once again, he's got a river between him and Alexander. Rule number 1, you don't want to fight across a river. Terrible idea. He's forcing Alexander to have to cross a river. 2, the lighter color here means rougher terrain, higher terrain. Over here, lower, smoother. Notice how he has all his cavalry over here. That's where Persia lines up all their cavalry, not up in the mountains. Turns out they're not as good up there. Alexander the Great, the madman, he's got a bunch of his cavalry over here in the rough terrain. All right. So that's the way the battle is set up. Here's their formations. And then the Persians also had some men up on the hill here just to kind of be harassers. Not really any tactical strategy outside of that. And so when the fighting starts, first off, notice that the cavalry here completely outnumber the cavalry here. So these guys get excited, and they actually charge across the river instead of forcing these guys to come to them. Why? If you can drive them off the battlefield and come up from behind, game over. These guys have to hold up against these guys if this battle is going to be successful for Alexander the Great. So these guys are largely bogged down by them. Over here, between the heavy infantry, how the fighting goes there, largely kind of just a stalemate with them fighting back and forth between each other. The important part is what Alexander the Great does here. D there stands for Darius. Alexander the Great, once again, he charges across, pushing them back as far as he can, and then he takes a contingent of his own cavalry and comes charging over towards Darius. Again, personally chasing him off the battlefield with his companion cavalry. Very dangerous thing to do. Alexander the Great is in the most dangerous position on the whole battlefield, the madman. And again, what do you do in these battlefields? Remember that if you are some guy like fighting right here, you do not have some bird's eye view of what's going on in the battlefield. You have no clue if you're winning or losing the battle, right? All you know is what's going on around you. And if you see that your king flees the battlefield, what is your thought?
It's over.
There is no way that we can win this battle. And so if the king flies off the battlefield, the men are going to fly off the battlefield. Because there's kind of this perverse incentive when it comes to the battlefield. Whoever holds out the longest, they have a much better chance to win the battle. However, if you're going to lose a battle, the first ones to flee are going to survive. It's the ones who realize too late that are pretty much guaranteed death. So if you're going to flee, you want to be one of the first. But if you're going to win, you want to stay and fight. And so once you see the king run off the battlefield, What are you thinking? There must be no chance.
Because
On the other hand, you're the Greeks over here. The madman Alexander is in the middle of the fighting over there. This must be a winnable battle.
Real.
So morale is a huge part of these battles. And that's why he's doing this with his shock cavalry, just charging at them. So, lined up, Darius outnumbers them, well over 2 to 1. Roughly 100,000 against roughly 37,000. The Persians, they wait at this river for Alexander to show up so that they have the advantage. And then Alexander uses his shock cavalry to shock the center while the phalanx starts getting across the river, is able to start pushing it back, create an opening for him, and then, once he gets it, he charges Darius himself off the battlefield. And I can't remember if it's this battle or if it's the previous battle, but Alexander keeps using the same tactic of personally charging at the enemy general, the enemy leader, the enemy king. And it might have been the previous battle, I think it was, but to give you an idea of what happens in these battles, in one of them, his helmet literally got whacked by a sword. It absorbed the blow, but the helmet broke. On top of that, as he was fighting, a man was about to kill him, and one of his companions noticed and cut off the arm of the guy as he was swinging to kill Alexander the Great. So he was very close to death in these battles. He almost died.
It's a lot of luck.
You think?
A lot of luck, a lot of turning your head right when the gun goes off. Whatever it is, yes.
I got the reference.
And so, once he gets Darius to flee the battlefield, now it's an all-out rout. And the Persians are going to start fleeing the battlefield. And here's where all the casualties are going to come in. And it's amazing that these guys held up against these guys, because these guys took the brunt of the deaths. They were completely outnumbered here and just had to hang on. And so Alexander the Great, after he charges Darius off the battlefield, he turns around and comes charging at the back of these cavalry to get his men released, and there you go, the battle's pretty much won at that point. So,
And
go ahead.
kills 30,000? Sorry, I'm jumping ahead here.
Yeah, roughly 30,000 Persians are killed in the process.
Wow.
Again, it's when you flee the battlefield that all these are happening. If you were to look at the numbers before Darius flees, you're probably looking at roughly 5,000 on each side. And then Darius flees, and everyone panics. And that's when the bloodbath ensues.
And is it normally the cavalry that performs the bloodbath? Because
The cavalry can often be the ones to charge them down. Sometimes the soldiers flat out just panic, and they realize that they're screwed, so they throw down their arms, hoping that you'll just let them go.
don't they just
So there's a lot of different ways that could happen.
I see.
But yes, being charged down by the cavalry is a very normal thing.
I mean, if you're running, they're running, you got an equal chance of getting out of there. It seems like.
Well, that's like you're assuming that you're in open field running. It's you're here trying to run against this guy here.
Oh.
Imagine it's Black Friday, everyone's trying to rush into Walmart, and I'm standing there with a gun. I could kill tons of them before they get in the store.
And the front person does, in the back people don't really know what's going on.
Right, yep, keep big picture.
So they're blocking everything.
It's hard to know exactly what's going on as someone in this battle. You could be just lined up focusing on what you're doing. Next thing you notice, the 10 guys next to you are running. It's like, so just chaos, mowing each other down, trying to be the first ones out. This isn't going to be as smooth. Everyone turn and sprint as fast as you can in that direction.
Gotcha.
Okay. Anyways, so that was that battle, and now Darius has just been humiliated, lost a huge portion of his army. He left so fast that he actually left his wife and some of his kids behind. So they were captured. But Alexander the Great was very gracious with him, very kind to him, treated him very well. More importantly, where he was camped up at Issus, he had a bunch of treasure that he brought with him. And so Alexander said, thank you. You just funded the rest of my campaign into taking over your land. It was very nice of you to bring all that stuff with you.
And he brought his kids. He did them.
That was a normal Persian thing to bring your family with you. He also brought his, I can't remember how many concubines, but they were all taken as well and given to the Macedonian soldiers. Okay, I think we covered that battle.
Life is cool.
So that's the second major battle. So now,
Sure, alive.
once again, he's conquered up here, and he's going to continue conquering the coastal towns. And the only Tyre is another one of these towns that decides that it's going to hold out against Alexander the Great. They had their contract with Persia. They were one of Persia's subjects, and so they were not going to give way to Alexander the Great. This siege is probably the one, if any, that's worth talking about a little bit. If you zoom up here, that's kind of a misleading map. Let me just close this for a second. It was actually an island. Here's the mainland. Tyre was on a separate island. And on that island, they had a big old wall around it, plus they had, what's it called? A bay area with ships, so they had their own fleet that they could supply. Had their big old wall. Tyre used to be on the mainland, so there was like ruins over here of an old city. But now they were completely over there, separated from Alexander the Great by all this water.
It was like the water washed up and.
No, they intentionally moved and built on the island
Gotcha.
for more security. So they were ready for this. Alexander the Great is over here. What on earth is he going to do to him over there? And he says something to him of the effect, I will make Tyre part of the mainland. They laugh at him and say, well, who do you think you are, Poseidon? Not a chance. You can't control the ocean. And so what he does is he takes all the stone from the old city and a bunch of nearby lumber, and he just starts filling it into the ocean, building a land bridge over.
Wow.
It's a very long process. They're constantly fighting him, sending ships to interrupt the progress, and it's very drawn out. It takes forever. He almost gives up a couple times. But the madman literally builds a bridge,
No way.
built from stone, wood, all that, fills it in across, so that he can get his army over here, and he ends up taking the city. As you can imagine, they were not treated very well when the siege was finally over. This was probably his hardest siege of all the cities that he has to siege.
This guy's a legend.
Nice.
Well, there's a reason that we call him Alexander the Okay.
I've watched there's a castle, famous castle that's just way out on some island. Or not, and there's just a bunch of, it's like, I don't know how to describe it, but it's, how do you spell that? Tyre?
Tyre. Now, actually, the part that he built, just with the way that time has gone on, I think has caught debris and stuff like that, and just natural sediment from the Mediterranean, and I think it did end up building a natural bridge. So I think the structure, the remnants of it, are still there today. Due to just how it caused natural changes to occur. All right, anyways. Gaza here, this is kind of a coastal city, but they were basically on top of a hill. So, big hill, and then they had their walls on top of the hill, and so their city was up here. Here's the people inside the city. But so it was a natural hill with steep edges. On top of that, they had their walls. And so, once again, they felt pretty confident that Alexander the Great couldn't get to them. That was going to be hard. He's tried climbing that and then attacking us. Not a chance. The madman, Alexander the Great, what does he do? He just piles up a ton of dirt up against there, makes a nice steady ramp, nice shallow ramp that they can march up, takes his siege units, his siege equipment up there, destroys the wall, sieges the city. No problem.
He's so cool.
All right. So then he gets down to there, and now he gets to Egypt. And when you remember Egypt, Egypt is Egypt. When Alexander the Great comes along, what does Egypt say? Oh, our liberators. How fantastic. Let's make you pharaoh. You're our king. There's no problems.
So he was quite merciful to people who surrendered.
Yes.
Well, he was.
So,
He has to be to conquer
It
it.
just encourages it.
right, it encourages it.
It's
It
encouraging.
would make sense to, yeah.
Right. And he wanted to be viewed as a liberator to most of Persia, free you from the Persian rule. That's how he wanted to be viewed. So, anyways, he comes down into,
And he named Egypt Alexandria.
yes. So now the most famous of his cities named after himself, Alexandria. Well, in Egypt,
there's
he
another
built.
Alexandria up there, right next to
Well,
Yeah, that's a nobody. Nobody cares about that thing. This is the Alexandria. The Alexandria from history.
Like
You've heard about the Library of Alexandria, or the Great Library. That's this Alexandria that they're talking about.
Huh?
You've heard about the Great Lighthouse, or the Lighthouse of Alexandria. That's this Alexandria that they're talking about. This becomes a great city. This is going to become the intellectual center of the world after Athens. So Athens is viewed as the intellectual center of the world. After our great philosophers, it's Alexandria that becomes viewed as the intellectual center of the world. And next week we will talk about Euclid of Alexandria. That's where he's from. And it's Alexandria that is going to pursue Aristotle's way of viewing the world, of thinking, his philosophy. And it's Ptolemy who's going to end up ruling in Egypt. And it's Ptolemy who's going to institute a lot of the things in that city of Alexandria that make it such a great place. He starts the process. And that's Ptolemy, as in the great-great-great-great-great-great-great-grandfather of Cleopatra. However many greats, not sure. Okay, anyways, that's kind of jumping ahead of the story. So he comes through there, builds that city of Alexandria. He goes here to some important place in Egypt, kind of like the Oracle of Delphi up in Greece. Meets with some oracle there who pretty much declares him as the son of a god. Once again, getting that confirmation that he is in fact a demigod. and going on his merry way.
I have the king of gods too, which is like
Zeus, yeah.
more demigod, like more impressive.
He was a son of the king of the gods,
Yeah,
is what they told him here.
I know what I'm saying.
Well,
Not just like
she's saying
a
Zeus.
regular god, like
Oh, well,
The
Zeus is a
king
big
of
shot
gods.
up here. And it was Ammon down here. So Zeus and Ammon, the Greeks would think that's two names for the same god. That's the way that they rationalize it. When they say Ammon, oh, they're talking about Zeus. I already knew.
alright.
Declared Pharaoh in Memphis. I don't think they technically give him the title Pharaoh, but basically, you are the, and list out all the powers that Pharaoh has, and he goes on his merry way.
What's the? Can we get a kind of a time range? Like how many years have passed? You know.
Yeah, those are labeled here. You probably can't see them very well. 334 here. 333 down here.
Oh, you see.
333 still here, coming down. 332 coming in. 331 and leaves. Spent some time in Egypt. Pretty nice place.
All of that in 2 years.
So he's 24, 23.
No, that's like
Starts out
He's
20.
20.
11 years.
So
He started at
334.
No.
He's
34
Now it's
to
been 3
3
years, so he's 23 years old.
he's leaving Egypt in 331.
23.
So starting in 334, leaving Egypt in 331.
So in 3 years.
So roughly 3 years, he's taken this half of the empire.
He's taken that half the empire,
2 years.
and in 3 years, so now 23 years old, and he's taken half the empire.
Yes, he does this all very young.
Dude, if he didn't die at 32 or 33.
Oh, I probably jumped ahead a lot. Sorry.
He could have died at 20.
So this was a slide I was supposed to do
Balance it out.
after the battle of
Considering
Issus.
what he did and the risks he took.
I jumped ahead. So Darius' wife, mother, and children are captured. Darius left those behind when he left. The Phoenician naval city captured. Phoenician naval cities are captured. In particular, Tyre and Gaza are sieged and enslaved. Those were the ones that held out against him. All of Egypt surrenders to Alexander, recognizing him as a liberator, someone saving him from Persia. To be fair, they did try to overthrow Persia a couple times, and there was back and forth there.
It's surprising that there were so many Greeks that fought on the Persian side.
So a lot of Greeks were just Greek mercenaries, and they just go where whoever was paying. There's a famous story of the 10,000 hoplites who come to fight as mercenaries in Egypt and end up having to escape and save their lives, and just march to the 10,000, but we don't have time for that.
Okay.
But yeah, they were used as mercenaries throughout the world. Everyone knew how great the Greeks were at fighting, at least around here. Obviously, they just dominated Persia prior to that. Recognized as the son of Ammon, so while he's doing that, Greek rebellion again goes on up in Greece. They once again tried to overthrow the Macedonians. Fortunately, one of the commanders, Alexander, left in charge up there, is able to deal with the rebellion, and so he doesn't have to personally go address it. So there is rebellion still going on, people trying to overthrow his rule. Fortunately, he's less than competent people in power behind him, so he can keep going on his merry way. For the most part, doesn't really interrupt his conquest into Persia. And now, after Alexander does this, Darius realizes what's going on here. He's in a lot of trouble. And so he sues for peace. He's done it a couple times, but this time he makes him a very generous offer. He says, I'll give you tons of money. I'll let you marry my daughter. On top of that, we will split the kingdom in half and you can keep it. I won't even contest you for it. Let's just have peace. And Alexander the Great, well, don't know his exact reply, but essentially, no.
He already had his wife, mother, and children.
He'd already had his wife, mother, and children.
That is gold. Some of it.
Yeah.
And a good chunk of his gold, and he just got Egypt, which Egypt has tons of money. Forgot to mention that point. Egypt also gave access to their treasury to Alexander the Great.
Probably loves crusading.
Spent a lot of time doing it.
Yeah.
All right, now the big battle, the Battle of Gaugamela. This is now Darius once again got together another 100,000 soldiers. Alexander, he's been able to incorporate some people into his army, and so his army has been able to grow a little bit. And this is going to be the last decisive battle that happens. So, this battle,
It's in the middle.
right here. Over here, Darius, knowing that Alexander is coming, he takes the time to prepare his perfect battlefield. He clears off all the clutter and all the stuff. He's going to now use his war chariots. So make sure that there's nothing in the way. He's going to set up the perfect place for him to fight the perfect battle with Alexander the Great. It's going to be a nice, wide open space because he knows he completely outnumbers Alexander. And so this will be the easy win for him.
He wants it to be aesthetically pleasing. Is that what I'm hearing?
He wants it to be
No, he's got chariots.
flat and easy for chariots to move over.
Uh-huh.
So he's going to set this up because remember, at the other place over here, it was between these two places, and Alexander was able to use that to his advantage. Because you kind of just clogged them up. You could only have so many people fighting on the front line. And so Darius couldn't utilize the fact that he completely outnumbered him and just encircled him. So they line up their army. Darius here, up here, way stretched out. Alexander like this. Now, Alexander, the madman, he takes his group of cavalry, these guys, and he starts charging out and around, like he's going to try and encircle the bigger army. Now, this is absolutely stupid. You can't encircle an army much bigger than yourself. It's not going to work. All you do is expose the flanks on your army, have someone hold you off, come down, and enclose that army, and it's game over. He's got a way smaller army. He cannot encircle these guys. Alexander the Great, he takes his army. He starts charging off this way. The Persians think he's trying to encircle us. Let's get him. So what do? They send these guys to come around to stop him from encircling, and they're going to tie him down. And they charge some guys out at him, which is exactly what Alexander the Great wanted. As they pull forward, that leaves the opening for him to once again charge right into the center of the army. So he's acting like he's encircling them. When these guys pull down and go to encase him, he says, perfect, and turns and charges at Darius. Once again.
I think the third time they're going to figure this out.
You think the third time they figure it out.
Look, Ryan tried.
But who on earth just charges head first into the middle of the army? That's crazy. You're going to get yourself killed. And I think it might have been at this battle that he actually did take a spear and got wounded. One of them he did. The man took a beating. It's not so he survived. And so once again, he pulls him over, he charges at Darius, gets Darius to flee off the battlefield, and then he turns around and encircles. Once again,
I feel like
his left
Darius
wing.
should just hold his ground.
It's a lot easier to say when you're looking at a map than when you're on the battlefield watching Alexander the Great and his companion cavalry coming for you.
I want to watch this in real life.
Make a move.
They make simulations of all these battles that you can go watch.
That's really good.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Anyways, once again, notice what's happening over here. Way more cavalry to way fewer cavalry over here. And once again, they have to hold off and just hang in there while Alexander the Great does his thing and then comes around and saves them from getting killed.
I imagine his soldiers were just ridiculously more disciplined.
Yeah, there's got to be something there.
Yeah.
They're just better.
Or they're.
Well, one, they are a standing army, so now they're trained, and you are a professional soldier. So they did have that element to them. But a huge part of these battles is just the morale of the soldiers, hanging in there. That's what it is.
It's true.
And it's a lot easier to hang in there when you know that this is going on.
It's a mindset.
So here you are hanging in there, even though you're taking way worse casualties than the other guys. You know, if you can just hang in there, help will come.
Yeah.
Whereas these guys are watching Darius flee. There's no help coming. Save yourself.
So it's like Alexander's courageousness that made the morale so strong.
It's a huge part of it. I mean, he had good tactics. He wasn't a dummy on the battlefield. But it's a combination of the two.
But like the fact that like mercenaries, for instance, aren't going to fight to the death. But just there's no way they wouldn't do that. And so I can see why he really wasn't even about.
But mercenaries also won't panic.
They won't.
No.
They're more experienced.
They're trained.
Right, so they know that, oh, things are looking bad now, but no, we're fine. So it goes both ways. Aristotle talks about it both ways, we didn't get into that, but in some ways, mercenaries, they're superior because of their experience. They know that don't be jumpy.
Yeah.
So remember, mercenary, yes, they're fighting for money, but on the other hand, yes, they have a ton of experience.
They still want to win.
But they
They still want to win, they still want to
not
jump.
gonna
Lose it
fight
all
for
for
the cause if they're
Right, they're not going to die for the cause,
That's what I meant to say. Yeah.
but they'll fight for the money. And since they're better trained, and you can pay them, I mean, the Greeks,
So Alexander
They were good
had
mercenaries. no, Alexander's troops, well, obviously he's having to pay for some of his troops, and they're troops from other places.
Yeah.
But what he had at the heart of his army, the major part of his phalanx, was this standing army, this Macedonian army, where this is your profession. You are a soldier for Macedonia.
Yeah.
You're not just a guy who fights for money. And so there was that element specifically with this phalanx, which is the heart of your army, right?
Gotcha.
Because they can hold out pretty much no matter what. Don't have to worry about that. So every time that there's a worry, it's always with the cavalry over here that things are iffy. These guys are fine, and then these guys are the ones winning the battle.
Constantly outnumbered.
Constantly outnumbered. Yes. Good generals always winning battles where they're constantly outnumbered. It's crazy. Anyways, and so with that, the Persian army is pretty much decisively beaten at this point. And so Darius, he once again retreats further east into his kingdom. He once again has plans of putting together a new army to go ahead and try and face Alexander the Great again. But he ends up getting overthrown by one of his generals or just someone in high power. Can't remember exactly who it is. Someone views it as this is their opportunity to take power. And so there's not going to be any more decisive battles like that. It's pretty much over from this point on, and now it's just the momentum carrying on its course. Go ahead.
Trying to get more the followers. If someone's going to overthrow Darius and then gather a whole new army, I mean, he has to first declare and everyone would accept that he's the new leader. And I imagine
Right. So it would have to be someone already in power.
So whatever choice they made to replace him was actually a mistake because they didn't have time.
And Alexander was also furious with him for doing that. But anyways, so after the battle here of Gaugamela, the rest of this, no more decisive battles, even though he's only gone this far. It's pretty much been determined. We've gone over the 3 major battles of Alexander the Great's career. Anyways, after that, he goes into Babylon here. Now, Babylon is functionally the capital of
Persia?
the Persian Empire. Functionally, they are the big city. This is the crowning jewel of cities. This is the city to have. And so, with this, you get access not only to a great wealth, but it's also just sure.
Trophy.
Yeah, a trophy, reputation, whatever you want to say. Susa is the actual capital of Persia at the time, as in this is where all the business is carried out, where the actual palace would have been located. So you got your wealthy city, kind of like your New York City. Now you got your Washington, D.C. You've got your capital city. And then he goes on to Persepolis. Persepolis, if you think all the way back, this is where King Cyrus was from, where the Persians were from. Why it's called the Persian Empire. It started at the city Persepolis. And so this is kind of like their religious capital. It was their capital early on, and it's kind of viewed as their holy city. And when he gets to Persepolis, one more time, Alexander burns the city to the ground, sells the population to slavery. This was retribution for what the Persians did to Athens. Remember, even though he's a Macedonian, the Macedonians view themselves as Greek. And the fact that the Persians did that to Athens is something that the Greek world feels. And now they officially have their revenge. You burn Athens to the ground, we burn Persepolis to the ground. From now on out, pretty kind to the rest of the cities. And he was kind to these cities as he took it. So, he burns Persepolis in retribution for the burning of Athens. Darius flees. He ultimately gets killed by Bessus, some guy. Alexander gets word of the plots of assassination to kill him as he's going along. Because remember, he's a Macedonian. All Macedonians eventually get assassinated or something. So, this whole time, there's all sorts of plots meant to try and kill him while he's out and away so that everyone can get their independence back. He hears rumors about these, and he starts kind of killing whoever's involved in any sort of assassination attempts, plots. Any rumors that he hears, he's ready to squash them. Huh?
Like, no for sure, just possibly.
Well, you never know for sure. I think some people admitted to it under torture, but when you're being tortured, is it because you want the torturing to stop and you're ready to die, or because you actually did it?
You never know.
Anyways, so Bessus, he's the one who he kills Darius and tried to take control. No surprise, his own men betray him. So he's betrayed by his own men and handed over to Alexander the Great. You don't need to fight us to get him, here you go, have him. So Alexander's troops then begin to desire to go back home all the way in 327. So now we're all the way over here. So Alexander, he's been marching, he's established his control over all these places, kind of just going, putting people in power and going on his merry way. There's not a lot of resistance to him. Occasionally there's some resistance, but he does away with it.
So it's been like almost 10 years.
No major resistance. Yeah, so it's been almost like 10 years. What year did he leave?
Now 30.
Was it? Yeah, 334.
334, so
26.
No, it's no.
um,
327.
No, what was 334? Did I look at that
Oh,
right?
I forgot the verse.
Oh, we can just look at the map. I don't need to do all that.
It's 27.
Yeah, 334 is when he leaves. Over here, 327, how many years has it been? It's been 7 years.
27 years old.
Yeah, so he's going to be 27 years old, or 26.
Well,
Yes.
okay, but you also have 329 over there. I don't know. Up the top there.
Right, so he went up and back.
Oh, I can't. Crap.
329, 328,
327 is
327.
when they're like, hey, let's go back home.
So we got 326 is
So they go up. Here's 327, here's 326.
Okay.
So he goes, he establishes his furthest point here. As he comes down here, he wants to invade India and continue his conquest into India and cross the Indus River into India. This is when his troops start to rebel against him. They say, it's been long enough, we've conquered enough, we've got a stupid amount of wealth, it's time to go home. So his troops start wanting to go home. They're done conquering. So his army mutinies against him in 326, which that happens over here by India, and that's when he decides he's not going to invade India, but instead turn and start coming home and let the troops come home. Huh?
Well, he'll come back and take over the world.
He's supposed
Feel this
to
out.
conquer all of Asia. He broke the net. Obviously.
So Alexander is ultimately
Asia as far as I'm concerned.
so he's ultimately forced to leave India, and
These are Christian.
he's going to come marching back. His initial plan here is he built a fleet that can haul a lot of his ships, but he needs to be able to supply his fleet. So he's going to have his land army march along, digging wells and stuff like that as they go to provide him with water. He just did not understand how awful this desert was. So he starts marching them along in this desert, finding out that there is hardly any access to water. Here's where he bails out on the plan and realizes we can't keep keeping this way. And so they cross up through the desert, get to that city where they're able to be resupplied. Alexander loses more troops going through this desert than he does in his battles.
Mr. J
true.
said that, well, Mr. J's timeline in yours, like we had this lecture literally last week, but he said you guys' timelines are off. He said he purposely took him through the desert so that they'll want to go back and fight instead of keep dying.
Now, it doesn't make sense because the majority of the people who mutinied against him, he intentionally sent on a another path to do other things. So he didn't have his whole army with him. He would have had to recollect his army and go.
Well, I'm saying, Mr. J said this was before he even conquered that more northern eastern side.
All right, I'm not sure what you're saying. The map here is the line that he takes, as well as we know it. Okay, so ends up getting through the desert, loses a bunch of troops there. Eventually gets back to Persepolis, and once they get back out of the desert, back to Persepolis, it is party time. These guys are now drinking all the time. It's big old celebration from here on out. Alexander turns into an absolute drunk, as far as we can tell, drinking all the time. Many of his men, I think it's like in the first night, something reports like 20 of them died of alcohol poisoning or something like that. So they're in party mode after all this fighting and getting all this wealth. And now it's time for Alexander to start doing more administrative things and start actually ruling his kingdom, figuring out how he's going to rule his kingdom. So gets back to Persepolis. He does what's called the Purge of the Viceroys. Basically, he hears about a bunch of governors he's put in place who's been abusing their powers, has them killed, puts new people in place that he can trust, doing administrative things. There's famously the 80 marriages at Susa over here. That's where he took 80 people in high positions in his army that were Macedonians and had them marry people in high positions in Persia, trying to tie his people in with Persian nobility to start getting things ruled smoothly, is the idea there.
Now, I'm confused. He shows up in Persepolis,
Persepolis,
where, okay.
that's when he gets...
What exactly does it mean when you burn a city down to the ground?
Meaning you light fire.
Oh, so sometimes it means you destroy the whole thing. Sometimes it means you destroy the prominent part of it.
So like the.
So Persepolis, it was mostly the part of the city where the palace was located that was completely destroyed.
Okay. I was gonna say I'd suck to show up the ones that you burned down when they needed.
But there would definitely be enough there to right. That's one of the criticisms people had of Alexander is you're burning your own property. You took this. This is yours. What are you doing?
Yeah.
Oh well.
Anyways,
Retribution.
as Alexander is doing all this and being amazing and told that he's a son of the god over and over again, and remember how the Persians treat their rulers versus how the Greeks do. When you rule over me as a Greek, you know we're fellow citizens, but you're the one in charge. The Persians, they view their ruler as ruling by divine right, if not actually a god himself, somehow incarnated. So the Persians are all treating Alexander the Great like he's a god, and worshiping like he's a god, and he's kind of starting to like that. And so he starts behaving a bit like a Persian noble, starts dressing more like the Persian's noble, starts acting more like a Persian, kind of likes it. There comes a point where he decides he actually wants his Greeks to prostrate themselves before him. And that's where he crosses the line with him, and so once again, he gets his troops mutinied against him in 324 BC as he starts buying some of his own hype, viewing him as adopting a lot of Persian decadence. So, don't like that. He gives a famous speech where he reconciles with him that you can go find bits and pieces of. And then finally, Alexander dies at the age of 32 in 323 BC.
Didn't he die of a mosquito?
We have no clue what he died of. There's arguments that he died of disease. There's arguments that was somehow related to his drinking. There's arguments that it was actually poison from an assassination attempt that was successful. So,
Probably that.
there's a lot of different theories on how he actually died.
A lot of people.
Who knows? But he did die young.
Yes, you James.
And he died with all that.
She always knows.
He said
That
he
world.
died of a mosquito
He could have died of a disease.
for a bath in a dude or something.
That's like my age.
Killed him.
It's crazy.
Yep, he was your age, and he controlled that.
Yeah. I don't
And that's the 10-year journey he took.
It's a little perspective.
Little perspective.
Yep.
Okay, so aftermath. As he died, the question was, who should your empire go to, Alexander? And he's supposed to have said, to the strongest. Who should get your empire? The strong. Whoever's the strongest, they should get it.
It was kind of their culture.
Very standard Macedonian culture type response. We don't know if it was real or not. Generals trying to rationalize what comes next. But what happens next is all of Alexander's greatest generals say, I'm the strongest. And so his generals start splitting up his kingdom amongst themselves. And so after that, they pretty much get control. So generals split the kingdom up amongst themselves. Ptolemy, Cassander, Lysimachus, I guess. Seleucus, he's going to be one of your more important ones, and Epirus. Because Seleucus, he's going to be the one, if you've heard about, that starts the Seleucid Empire. I don't know.
Yeah.
Anyways, the instant the generals split it up, they all think that they don't have enough, start fighting with each other to get more control, and so there's a fighting going on. That's the Diadochi Wars. You can go learn about those if you want. Those go from 322 to 281. There wars that power changes hands, but things kind of settle down. I'll give you a picture of how things kind of settle down. Importantly, Ptolemy is the one who ends up with Egypt. And in particular, he ends up with the city of Alexandria, focusing now more on the philosophy. He starts to construct the Moseum, something like museum, the Moseon, which is supposed to be dedicated to the arts of the Muses.
So
A piece of that was the Great Library of Alexandria. That was one of the things encompassed there. Another thing that they famously had was a zoo, for example. So this was some big research center to continue the development of research.
Yep.
And supposedly, as Alexander the Great was out conquering, he would send specimens back to his teacher Aristotle to classify.
Oh, yeah.
Supposedly.
That's
Yeah.
amazing.
So this system, this way of thinking, definitely lives on here in the city of Alexandria and here with Ptolemy. It definitely appears as though Aristotle had an effect on Ptolemy in his way of thinking.
Was he Aristotle around while this was all happening?
Yeah, Aristotle lives through Alexander the Great's death. Remember, Aristotle flees Athens when Alexander the Great dies. Or somewhere near then. Because it's viewed as a time for them to overthrow Macedonian rule. Remember, Aristotle is a Macedonian. So a Macedonian sentiment,
forgot.
naked, yeah, this anti-attitude towards Macedonia is on the rise, that's when Aristotle, he knows it's just a matter of time before they turn to kill him. So he leaves Athens famously saying, I won't allow Athens to commit a second sin against philosophy. They won't let him kill him the same way that they killed Socrates.
Yeah. And he goes to Alexandria?
No, he stays in another place. Alexandria doesn't really start kicking off as an intellectual center until Ptolemy gets to work.
And he dies?
Ptolemy dies.
Ptolemy rules. No, Alexander. Aristotle dies shortly after Alexander.
Okay.
It's like a year or two after him, not much longer after him.
I see.
So Alexandria becomes a center of intellectual investigation in the world now. Kind of replaces Athens as time goes on. Just to give you a sense of how the dust kind of settles. So this becomes a Seleucid Empire over here, and then this is what the Ptolemies get in Egypt. And then, less important for our story. Since we won't be talking about the rise of Rome, we won't talk much about what's going on up there, but you might just note Rome now is on the rise and they're controlling a good amount of the Italian peninsula. And unfortunately, we don't get to tell their story. So that covers Alexander the Great, and we'll be starting with Euclid of Alexandria next time. Any questions? Great, see you guys next week. We'll also be deciding what class to do next week.